coming in, but I'll go ahead and kick us off. Good afternoon, all, and welcome to the School of Data Science Wednesday afternoon seminars. These are going to be a regular event throughout the fall semester, every Wednesday from 4 to 5 o'clock. Sometimes it'll be opportunities for you all to connect with employers to learn more about specific companies. Sometimes a chance to learn about a new tool, a new technique, and sometimes a chance to delve into a new area that is changing how data science is moving. And that's indeed today. We're going to be talking about cloud computing. We're very excited to have Tom Fisher, a UNC Charlotte alumni, a member of the School of Data Science Advisory Board, and formerly a member of the College of Computing and Informatics Advisory Board, a longtime supporter of UNC Charlotte. Tom, we cannot say thank you enough for your continued commitment to the school, and most importantly to our students. Thank you for being here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about you, and then Bob Evans, who will be talking specifically about his experience in cloud computing. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. Just to give you kind of a quick update for next week, as I said, these are going to be every week. If you go to the data science website under events, you can find out some of the upcoming sessions. We're going to have SAS back talking about a day in the life of a data scientist. Next week we have Dr. Lewis Gordon, who's going to be talking about knowledge production, racism in the research academy. These are open to the campus, to students, to faculty, to partners of ours. This is a wide open discussion. We hope that you will join us for future events. Please check that out. So a little bit of background on Tom Fisher. Tom recently came back to North Carolina. It's good to have you back home in the state. He joined SAS. He is driving the strategic business development activities at SAS, including the Cloud Alliance partners and SAS Vector Labs. He also is overseeing SAS's hackathons. There are global hackathons that are going on. Previously, he was Chief Technology Officer for MapR. He also was with make sure I almost said Cisco, Oracle. Important difference there. Where he was the Chief Information Officer for Oracle and Senior Vice President. We again are glad to have him back in North Carolina, back working with SAS as a senior advisor to Dr. Goodnight and the organization. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tom, to talk a little bit more about Bob Evans. Thank you both.
Sure.
We appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, everyone. We're very fortunate to have Bob Evans. If you have not seen or not visited Cloud Wars, CLOUDWARS.com, you should, because that is the mechanism in which Bob publishes. Bob has a long history in the information technology business. He's been an editor. He's been, the grand poobah of everything related to cloud now. You will find that with customers and with vendors, every one of them subscribe to the Cloud Wars because Bob's insight and access is very unique in our industry. He is a trusted advisor. He's also a journalist, a former journalist. I don't know. Do you still call yourself a journalist, Bob?
I never did, Tom, and I hope I never will.
See, I got that first dig in at you, Bob. Bob is widely published, widely quoted. He has followers like Larry Ellison and like Mark Benioff, names that we all recognize in our industries that were some of the early starters of the cloud programs. We'll cover a whole lot of different territories, but one of the goals that we have is to be able to provide you as students information that's relevant to you. So we'll be talking about a number of different topics. I'll start it out with, Bob, as these folks move into or join the world, where would you position cloud? I mean, is it a gotta have, should have, will have? How would you position it?
Well, first, Tom and Josh, thank you for the gracious introduction, and to everybody who's here. Thanks a lot for making the time to come and hear us. It's always a pleasure to speak with folks who are not just pursuing different degrees or advanced degrees, but I think changing how they think and in turn changing how the world thinks. So thanks very much for the opportunity to spend some time with you. Tom, there's a guy named Frank Slootman, and he's currently the CEO of Snowflake, and he's been around the tech industry for 25 or 30 years. He's been at a lot of the big tech companies.
Wasn't he? He was at ServiceNow before, right?
Yes, he was. And, before that, some of the other big players, VMware and other places, but he was really steeped and grew up in the on-premise world, and he's now moved over into the cloud. And he said earlier this year in a TV interview, with unconditional certainty, he said the cloud is the biggest thing that's ever happened in the tech industry. And my reference to it, from everything that I can pull together, I refer to it as the greatest growth market that the tech industry, or probably any other industry, has ever seen. It's just been phenomenal, and the impact of it, Tom, I think is pervasive. So it is here, it's real, and the crazy lives that we've all experienced over the last 6 months have only made that more urgent, as companies need to be able to engage with everybody in new and different ways, and the cloud is sort of the express track to get there.
Yeah, I was going to say, for COVID has been an enormous change agent for many companies. I mean, we're all on Zoom today, right? Zoom, if you haven't looked at their stock, every time there's an additional burst of pandemic, their stock seems to go up. But it also represents, when I talk to the SaaS customers, their big driver, I mean, this has just been an accelerant to get to the cloud. The responses that I've gotten back from venture capitalists and industry analysts that we've spoken to have all said, it's not a matter of if, it's when. Even large banks, large financial institutions that traditionally have worried about these things are moving to the cloud. But I wondered what your perspective was relative to some of the crazy regulations that, like HIPAA and IFSR and all of those kinds of things. How do you think the cloud guys are doing in handling that?
Yeah, Tom, what's wild, and I just want to expand on something that you were saying is, so for purposes of this discussion today, and I think a lot of the issues we're talking about, it isn't just like the 10 biggest cloud vendors who are going to win. What happens with a lot of what they're doing, right, is that the cloud and the capabilities it offers kicks open the door for some of these phenomenal new technologies that I'm sure everybody in the call knows far better than I do. But, from artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, a lot of these different sort of things that have been kind of waiting to get a real on-ramp into the business community. The cloud provides that. So it's going to be a force multiplier, not only for what, cloud applications or cloud infrastructure, but also it's going to be the way that so many of these remarkable and truly world-changing new technologies become mainstream. So, Tom, in the context of your question about some of those things like HIPAA and so forth like that, right? 30, 40, 50 years ago, some of the big systems that are still running in some big corporations today, right? Their ultimate goal was stability. Don't mess with it. It's never going to go down. It can't be tampered with. It doesn't connect to the outside world. It is stable, rock solid, immutable. And, you don't have to worry about it. Well, that was great, or it was great at a time when business was all fairly predictable. And to a lot of the young folks on the call, this is a true story. There was a time not so long ago when big companies would have a 7-year plan or a 5-year plan for the really, courageous or crazy ones. And they would stick to that. So you're 28, 30, 32 months into a plan. You say, well, check the box, everything's coming along fine. Stuff didn't change that much. Customers wanted the same sort of things. They wanted a little bit less expensive and a little bit faster, but generally that's how it went. And gosh, did the world flip, within the last 5 or 10 years, as that went from being, a seller-driven world to a consumer-driven world. So one of the advantages, Tom, that I think that the cloud really offers here to people is it's not built to be totally locked down. It's fully secure, but on the other side, there's a recognition like, hey, things change more frequently than every 5 years or 7 years. I got to be able to match the agility and the move and the shifting requirements of my customers. And that, to me, Tom, is where I think the cloud is going to be the best thing possible for companies that have to deal with regulatory requirements, data residency, data sovereignty, some of the new things that will come out about, the California privacy regulations, certainly some of the more specific things that are in Europe these days. And, likely in the wake of COVID, there'll be some additional regulatory issues that we've got to deal with here in the US. So I think the cloud is going to be the best friend of companies that are struggling to try to find the right way to innovate on the one hand and move forward and fully comply on the other.
So, one of the things that I see that gets a little confusing is moving to the cloud. Is that data transformation, or is that, transforming your business, or is there more to it?
Well, Tom, I want to push that question back to you in a second here, but I've built a business around the cloud, so I'm bullish on it, but I think I'm bullish in a grounded way. I don't think I'm, just out here blowing smoke about, something that's going to be cool for a couple of years and then disappear. But where I think the real power of the cloud comes in, and for the folks here from the data science school, where I think this is so interesting is, if I don't know how many years you'd have to go back, 10 or 12 years, right? When people were talking about a wireless phone. Nobody ever says wireless phone anymore, right? I mean, I remember I was trying to work up real righteous indignation talking to my daughters about something. And I said, don't make me sound like a broken record. And, they gave me that look like, first, what is a record and what is a broken record? And wireless phone, when I'd say that, they said, like, wireless as opposed to what? And I think, Tom, there will come a point not too far in the future where there'll be much less talk about cloud because it's going to be the big thing. And the alternative or the exception is going to be on-premise stuff. So does that mean cloud's going to I think the significance of it is going to multiply because it's going to be the catalyst that changes how customers engage with a business, how those businesses then gather information about what's going on in the marketplace and create newer, better plans, newer, better products, how you let customers come in and co-create products and services with you, how developers and data scientists and programmers now become the coolest of the cool kids in companies because they're going to be on the front lines of how businesses engage with the world around them. I think these new ways of doing stuff, it's just profoundly different from 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and just imagine how different it's going to be a couple years from now. So, Tom, you give me a a temperature check on that. Am I just blowing smoke here?
No, I think that in the early days with cloud, it was Amazon had a premier position, still does. But what I've observed is that it's increasingly a fast race to the bottom for these guys. If they stay in infrastructure as a service, and now that I'm at SaaS, one of the things that I've worked with all three of the cloud providers is they want to, just as you described, they want to transform their business. So what was traditionally API calls like SQL Server or Active Directory, those are all available now in the cloud. And what I'm seeing and what I've been talking specifically with Google and with Microsoft, what they're looking for is they want higher level services. They want a supply chain model that can be called from an application. And just like these folks have probably learned with Kubernetes has an orchestration engine. Well, Microsoft has released a product called Power Automate. And what Power Automate allows you to do is allows you to orchestrate an application. And now you can embed analytics along with the transactional system so that the information that comes out of that analytical engine feeds that transactional system. And that's an orchestration process that you couldn't do in the past because applications were kind of hardwired. One of the things that I've observed, Bob, is that the cloud providers, when they first came out, their systems, the infrastructure that they were providing was really targeting transactional systems like Salesforce, like SuccessFactors, and like others. One of the interesting things in working with the leaders in these the leading cloud architects across all three of the clouds, is as you introduce data science and as you introduce data analytics, they really now understand that you can't run that on a traditional flat infrastructure as a service. It requires more compute, faster compute, more in-memory storage, more networking bandwidth. So as you described it, the transformation that I'm seeing them go through now is they're creating pods inside these environments with reference architectures that are specifically targeting data analytics and data science. What's interesting about that is, at the end of the day, they get paid based on consumption. And guess what the bigger consumers are? You think a transactional application consumes more compute and storage than an analytics platform? Oh no, oh no, no, no. What we produce at SAS in terms of analytics requires a very fundamentally different architecture. And what I find so interesting is that, unlike in the past with the IBMs and the large companies in the past, they were a lot more rigid. These are very agile companies. Satya Nadella has created agility in a company the size of Microsoft. It's astounding to me. Or Thomas Kurian at Google, or Andy Jassy over at Amazon. So you see these companies constantly pivoting to new services, new capabilities that are being offered on the cloud. They don't necessarily want to own it, they want to run it.
Tom, yeah, those are terrific points there. I think that all the things that you've been describing, it seems in some ways, there are two goals that every business right now is striving toward as far as their internal operations go. One is, how do we get to innovation more quickly? How do we get the value of innovation coming up more quickly? Whereas in the past, the models allowed for that to happen over, if you really killed it, 9 months, 12 months, 50, but more often it was 2 or 3 or 4 years. And that was one of the things that led to that sort of plodding pace of business. And, the seller was in charge, and we would, old fuddy-duddies like you and me would go to a store and we would try to find the thing that most closely approximates what we wish we could have. Whereas today, you imagine it, type a couple things on your phone, and boom, the world comes to you. So those old systems were built for a very different world. The new ones, as you've described, are astoundingly agile, nimble. And one thing, Tom, along these lines that I wanted to impart to our friends here on the call is, I brought up this stuff like the broken record and, the wireless phone, just to emphasize this point that a lot of language right now is transitory. I think cloud as a thing will continue to be phenomenally disruptive, but the notion that everybody says, oh, that's the cloud, that's going to, dissipate over the next few years because it's going to be pervasive. It'll be everywhere. It will be the way that most business around the world is conducted because it is faster, it can be less expensive, and most of all, it lets businesses put the customer at the center of that business's universe. Right? Because the old days, the systems were set up and the mindset was such that, I don't know if some of the folks on the call here remember this term or ever learned it, of banker's hours. But there was this crazy thing when I was growing up that banks were open Monday to Friday from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. And it seems preposterous. It seems crazy. Why would somebody do that? And I think they did it because they could. If you're only open 6 hours a day, you're operational. And where are people going to go? They have no alternative to it. And today, instead of the sellers sort of forcing the business models on us, it is the consumers who are driving through their intentions, through their desires, and through their quest to live either a digital lifestyle or a digitally enhanced lifestyle that pushes that up the chain into the business world, where every business, whether they sell directly consumers or business to business, has to be able to operate on a digital scale. And the COVID experience we've all lived through for the last 6 months is only going to accelerate and intensify that move.
I find it interesting, Bob, because the reality is that what you're describing is digital transformation. Mm-hmm. Everything will become digital. What that means, if you're a student of data science, is you can't be focused exclusively on the tools, whether it's Jupyter or Zeppelin, or if it's Python or R. You really need to get in that customer's shoes and understand the business problem. I mean, I know that at SAS, where we tend to excel and where we find greatest customer support is when we go in and support and provide a solution out of the box that solves a specific problem. And one of the things we spend a lot of time doing is training our employees that are in the data science world to be able to communicate to those business users in terms that they understand. And what triggered that was your whole discussion about language. Because I grew up I started out with COBOL and RPG, went to C, C++. I do Python in my spare time and R because I'm an idiot. But the reality is that all of those languages are transformative, but they've gone through this whole phased in process. What I think this next generation of engineers that are coming out have to have is empathy for the customer, an understanding of the business. Because if you don't understand that, you can be the best code cutter in the world. You're not going to solve a business problem, which is what people specifically want today.
Tom, you know that again. Look, to everybody on the call, I don't want to be openly disrespectful of Tom, but I also don't want to keep giving him a lot of compliments throughout this call. That cuts against my nature.
It makes me feel so good, Bob.
Oh, sure it does. So anyway, Tom, I'm going to stop saying, Tom, what a great point. All your points are great. And now I don't have to, compliment you over and over. Good. But Tom, a guy that you work closely with at Oracle, and, who I know is a big fan of yours, Thomas Kurian, and he left Oracle almost 2 years ago to become the CEO at Google Cloud. The word you used a couple minutes ago about empathy, and specifically empathy about customers. When I had a chance to talk with him, he had been there 3 or 4 months, and I asked him what was the biggest surprise from his first few months at Google Cloud. And he described it in terms of the mindset of the people. He said they're terrific people, but they have been conditioned to think that because this is how we do things at Google, then everybody else should do things the way we do. Google was started at a time when it didn't have layers and layers and rooms and warehouses full of old-fashioned on-premises stuff that they had to somehow juggle and manipulate and resuscitate and get those up into modern times. They built everything for the cloud. So Thomas said that a lot of the engineers and the salespeople were in some ways wandering around wondering, why in the world would these business customers, why did they do all this dumb stuff for 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years? And he said, that's poisonous. He said, nobody set out to, develop the sort of complex, multi-layered things they have now. But that is the reality. And he said, if we don't learn how to meet our customers where they are and have deep empathy for the situation they're in and how we can help them be the very best customers they can be, he said, we're going to fail. So this superb technologist who understands technology strategy and business strategy as well as anybody, working at what I think you could make the case, one of the world's top 2 or 3 technology companies, he realized that the greatest technology in the world will not help you if you don't understand how to see things through the eyes and through the mind of your customers. And to me, that was a stunning revelation from him, but it was also one that in my mind said, if anybody's going to be able to get this company under growth trajectory, it's Thomas. And what they've achieved in, this 20 months or so since he's been there has been just extraordinary. But it was a cultural thing, Tom, not a technology thing.
That's so interesting because, I remember, I go way back with Google to when Larry and Sergey were still in the garage before they were still PhD students at Stanford. But the thing that I always felt about those two that was going to make them successful is that they understood the problem that they were trying to solve. I remember my experience with them was early days. They were still in the garage. I was at eBay. I was the chief technology officer there. And these two guys stride into my office and say, we want to put all of your listings in our search engine so that when you look for something, a bar of soap, eBay would show up on that listing. I went to my boss, who was Meg Whitman at the time, and told them that I thought this was great technology. We were looking for a replacement search engine. And her view was more traditional. It was, well, we want account control. You probably remember that term, which meant I want to control the customer. So when I went back to Larry and told him that, he just smiled at me and he said, in 2 months, all of your listings will be in Google, whether you want it to be that way or not. And he was off by a factor of 50%. In 30 days, every single item on eBay. But it goes to the point that account control is a perception. It's not a reality. And technology that we're all working with today enables this. Who would have ever thought that a single command line, which I grew up with, became the way in which you find things today? But they always had the view that that was the simplest thing, and they always had the view from the back end to monetize. What I find interesting is that Thomas is now trying to do something like that, but almost supercharged across all of the industries. I can't stress enough to the students that are out there, what we're seeing now is we're seeing those higher level services that we described early on are becoming a vital part of the Google strategy. They want those things. They created Kubernetes. They're going to create a comparable thing for applications so that you can orchestrate applications, and it probably will exceed anything that's in the marketplace. But one of the things that that Thomas talked about is I need capabilities that don't exist today. Bias detection, so that I know when I run that model if there's inherent bias in it. Does it particularly favor a supplier or a buyer? So those are all critical things as these services come out on the cloud to be able to provide, and that's all data science. But you have to understand your customer and the problem you're going to solve in order to understand the bias that might be interjected in it. So it's, I go back to what we talked about. It is not just about the technology, Python and R, or SAS for that matter. It's really understanding the customer, understanding the problem that you're going to solve. And I think that relates back to the whole discussion that you and I have had for a couple of years now around digital transformation. How do you transform a business so that it's prepared for? And I wondered if you might be able to provide some insights into those companies that have done that and done it well. And what do you think their keys to success were?
Yeah, sure. Tom, one of the most interesting ones here, and there's some, fairly tangible sort of boundaries around this story, is the pharmaceutical company Novartis. Mm-hmm. Their CEO came on board about 1.5 years or 2 years ago. And one of the things that he said was, let me take a step back. When I was a kid, the circus came to town, and my buddies and I were hanging out there on the night that they were starting to break down the circus, and the guys working at the circus said, hey, you want to help? So we did some work with them, got to see some things behind the scenes you normally wouldn't. And I noticed that they got all the circus elephants, and they had these fairly small ropes around their neck, and they put the little pegs in the ground and tied the rope to them. And these, 10,000-pound elephants just stood there very passively, very docilely. And I said to the one guy, why does he just rip that thing out of the ground and throw it 10 blocks away? And the guy said he doesn't know that he can. The elephants were trained from when they're very young to believe that when, this is tapped in the ground, that you just sit still. So we see this in a lot of different companies, Tom, that the way where we have been dictates and proscribes where we are going. And so this requirement for a visionary type of leadership, of somebody who's willing to come in and see where things are going rather than where they've been, was what the Novartis CEO was digging at, because he said, look at the constraints that every pharmaceutical company in the world has allowed to be placed on it, that it takes 12.5 years and $2.5 billion to create a new medicine that is approved and out in the marketplace. 12.5 years, $2.5 billion. So they used to talk about, oh man, if we could slice 6 months off of that. And, it was just astounding. And he said, okay, that was true, but that was true in the past. He said, with the tools we have today, with artificial intelligence, with this advanced cloud technologies, with the data analytics and predictive analytics, and this stuff we have on a worldwide basis, he said, we think we can chop that in half. And as soon as we chop it in half once, we're going to get ready to chop it in half again. So he said, of course, that's good for Novartis, but what it's really going to be good for are people around the world who are waiting for some medications that would have taken 12 years to get to market. So I think, Tom, in that way, it was the digital transformation at Novartis has been so extreme. It's to the point now where they say there will come a time not too far in the future where we will be able to discover new medicines purely through the data that we have. They won't have to go out and do clinical trials, or maybe they can do them in parallel, but they see the power of data dramatically turning upside down sort of the premise of the company, that how they operate, how they create new products, what is possible and the vision that's possible. And one other example I'd offer from the pharmaceutical industry was Eli Lilly, and this is probably 10 or 12 years ago, but they were one of the early adopters of the AWS cloud infrastructure. And a friend of mine at the magazine where I worked went out and talked to, one of the heads of research at Eli Lilly and said, what's been the impact of this? And the head of research at Eli Lilly said, it has changed our perception of time. And, that's a little out there, but his point was, he said, before we used to scale down the nature of the questions we'd ask or the projects we'd undertake because we were limited. We knew that when we got computer time eventually fired up, it could only handle certain things in certain batches because everybody around the company had to get in line to do analytics and queries. So he said, we had small vision for small projects, and as a result, we only had small breakthroughs. And he said, what the cloud allowed us to do was blow away those notions of limited scale, limited scope, limited time. And instead, he said, we were able to start to tackle massively more complex projects with bigger implications, bigger outcomes, bigger insights. And you look at, from airlines and what they do with everything from preventive maintenance to pricing to the routes that they run. The airlines, that's still a thing, right? Airlines are still, okay.
Occasionally they fly.
Yeah, occasionally. So, Tom, but
they're on time now.
Yes, yes. Never overbooked. But Tom, let me just quickly, a different end of the spectrum. One of the world's largest grocery store chains is Kroger. And Kroger has had a, pretty strong, pretty cool IT organization for, 25, 30 years. But more recently, as this digital transformation, this digital experience hit, they've really sort of pumped up what they're doing in IT. And they also evaluated all the big tech vendors, and they formed a strategic relationship with Microsoft. So Kroger's in the business now of not only selling groceries, but they also create and sell enterprise level applications to other retailers. They don't just use it internally. They're now a software company that sells software to other retailers based on their own experience and their own expertise. So IT goes from being a cost center, or what the term I despise, a back office operation, to one where we're creating products, we're creating services, we're generating revenue. But this would never have been possible without some of the modern capabilities in the cloud of data analytics and being able to look at things and look at scenarios to a level of depth and richness never possible before. So those are the companies that are positioning themselves not just to do something a little bit faster or a little bit less expensive, but to do entirely different types of things, to shatter the conventions and the constraints that we have allowed ourselves to put on various companies or industries or how we go about doing things.
So one of the questions that keeps coming back to me is how important, and I know this is kind of a silly question, but the customer experience. How do you think the customer experience is going to transform? What I've seen is that we've moved from what was enterprise software, We brought consumer-like experiences into the enterprise. But what does that next generation look like in the cloud? Is it a whole bunch of APIs that people glom together to create an output that feeds into something like a Tableau or some sort of a visualization tool?
Hey, Tom, let me push this back at you a little bit. There were developers and the different traditional development tools and so forth like that. And everybody said, we gotta cut down the time from a development project when it starts to when it ends. Then there was the whole low code thing. Then there was the no code thing. So I wonder if this imperative, and now I think LinkedIn reported about 15 months ago that for the first time in history, through LinkedIn's data, it saw that non-tech companies were hiring more developers and programmers than the big tech companies were. So the job market, the opportunities and the demand is now pervasive. So as some of these no code, low code thing comes, I don't think it's going to in any way undermine the need for, rigorous data science folks and developers, but it is going to make them more important because more people in more companies are going to be able to take some of these initial steps, toward development, toward being able to do some of these things, and prepare it and understand it in the perspective. So it's in two-way, Tom, imperative here. One is non-technical business people have to understand more clearly, what am I, a non-technical person? What's my responsibility to understand about how I engage with data science experts properly? How can I be most productive to them in outlining my problem and the ongoing collaboration? And then coming the other way, for a lot of our friends on the call here, it's got to be that the data science experts have to be not only these world-class experts in their field, but also to have a broader understanding about what's going on in the business world. What are some of the big challenges? How do I work effectively as a fully immersed business person in this company who happens to have a great expertise in data science? So I think a lot of those things are bubbling up, and, we see every company in every industry you talk to, they said that the number one need or desire that the CEOs have is talent. Everybody's talking about that, right? You see this all the time, right? From your company and others. It is insatiable right now.
What we're experiencing is when we try to hire data scientists, we're actually competing with our customers to hire them. Because to your point, we're actually working on an initiative in SaaS called Citizen Data Science. Now, that's not intended to replace the data scientist, but it's intended so that the data scientists can work on the big, really complex problems. I mean, when I was at MapR, one of the things I observed is that 80% of the time, a data scientist's time is spent preparing data. Well, if you had citizen data scientists who could understood that data and could prepare it and do some fundamental analytics out of it, and then feed that information forward into a larger data science pool, that's the vision that SaaS has. And that all of these utility capabilities, like services in the cloud for supply chain or services in the cloud for parts manufacturing, those become the result of those things. What's interesting, Bob, is now that I'm running our vector labs, many of our customers, like Kaiser Permanente, I'm probably not supposed to say them, but they have come to us and said, look, we have this really phenomenal platform. We want to move analytics into it. Can we build that with you, SaaS? And then, as you described, can we take that out to the market? Because we want to become a software company. We think it's that important. So I can see it kind of, you've enlightened me, which is a hard thing to do for an old geezer like me, but it's very true. And all the signs are there. The tech companies are competing with businesses for the same skill sets. And you know what? The businesses have the advantage. They know that if they bring that data scientist on, he or she could save them $40 million, right, from the get-go. And what's that worth? Okay, I'll pay that person $200,000, $300,000, where SaaS can only pay them $150,000 to to 200 or whatever the numbers are, because they get that, they can see the tangible benefit because they know the problem that they need solved, and it allows the data scientists to really focus on effectively making that change and driving that through data.
Yeah. Yeah. Tom, if I could offer one offshoot on that, right? These days, we all hear the term digital transformation constantly. And I think that while the term itself might be misapplied or perhaps overused every now and then, the fundamental notion of it is absolutely essential. And I think it's interesting, getting to talk to executives and CEOs in the tech industry, but more importantly, outside the tech industry. You say to them, what's your number one goal? And many of them will say things like digital transformation. And if you nudge them a little in the conversation, what really comes about is this. Well, actually, my top priority for my company is to deliver phenomenal customer experiences. But the only way I can do that relative to where I am now is by undergoing this digital transformation. So I think in some ways, digital transformation is the means, and the end is these phenomenal customer experiences that people are pursuing, right? Because as we talked about, in the prehistoric times when you and I were growing up, we were sort of captives. We didn't have anything like the alternatives, and businesses could have bankers' hours. They could operate on these sorts of things like, well, if you bought it at that store on the other side of town, you have to return it to that store on the other side of town. Yeah, but I'm here. Well, no, too bad. So it's sort of gone totally the other way. So customer experiences where businesses using a lot of those, remarkable technologies that you've described and that the data science experts and data analytics folks are going to be able to unlock, so that can a business move as fast as the world around it. A great thinker was a huge influence on my work, a guy from the University of Michigan, C.K. Prahalad. He described it as the 3 stages of competitive capability. He said the first one was, he said, make and sell. So that was sort of the old days. The second was listen and respond. And a lot of companies have become quite good at that. He said the next stage, the real winners are going to be the ones who can, what he called, anticipate and lead. So in this notion of sense and respond around, right, we got to have our sensors up everywhere, cultural, personal, carbon-based, silicon-based, all those sensors. And what has to happen though is the response time. It used to be like, okay, well, we got some numbers, we'll take them back to the lab, give us about 18 months. And then now it's got to be like 18 hours, 18 days. So the pace of business, I think right now has frenzied because it reflects the nature of our lives, right? I don't know what I want to have for dinner, but I'm going to have dinner an hour from now. So do I have to go? Hell no, I don't have to go to the grocery store, and I don't have to, but I've got these other choices. So what does that mean to those, companies that deliver? Well, they've got to set things up a certain way. Then you go back up behind them, up the supply chain to the farmers, the produce companies, the meat companies, the bakeries. All of those companies have to become smarter, more nimble, more aligned, more focused, with their eyes on the customer, focused on what does the customer want and need, where are they headed day to day, what are they liking more of, less of. And that is where I think for our friends on the call, there are just phenomenal opportunities to be, in some ways, these advanced eyes and ears of not where the world has been, but what the world as it is becoming. It's a spectacular opportunity.
It's so interesting that you say that, because there was a technology that was out there that was very hot called blockchain. Remember that, right? Bitcoin, it had got a bad rep because of that. What was interesting is I have a friend of mine who used to be the CIO and CTO at Walmart. His name is Jeremy King. He used blockchain to go literally from farm to store as a mechanism to track produce, so that they can tell you down to the package if there is some sort of contamination. They know instantaneously. So to support your perspective, I can tell you from my own experience, because SaaS has been very heavily involved in COVID. And we have one of the largest clinical trial solutions in the marketplace. One of the reasons that we're able to do the pharma work much faster is because these companies like Gilead and like AstraZeneca and GlaxoSmithKline, their CIOs have had the vision to move to the cloud. So compute capacity isn't the issue. The number of times that we can run a simulation on 60,000 patients, we can do that in 10 to 15 minutes and simulate what the impact would be if there is some sort of an enzyme that's not properly chemically created. It's yes.
So we're coming into the home stretch. We got about 13 minutes left, and we've got a couple of questions out there already. Can we, is it okay if we kind of switch over to we put you all on the spot, both of you?
Well, as long as it's Bob, because I'm going to point everything to Bob. He's got all the answers.
Well, the first question we have actually goes to the earlier part of your presentation, is that this idea of, so the entities who are using the cloud, do they have to ever worry about an end-of-life hardware process planning in their system? And then we've got a couple questions from Abdul Aziz talking about some of the different providers and how they relate. But I'll come back to those in a second.
Well, let me address the do you ever have to worry about? Well, the reality is that the cloud providers take away that worry. They're constantly innovating. What's interesting to me is many of these cloud providers actually manufacture their own hardware, or they'll put forward very specific specifications to the hardware manufacturers. So in the example that Bob talked about, it's inverted the process of buying, where I would worry about is, I ran the cloud for Oracle for a number of years. I never worried about atrophied older hardware. It was just assumed in the business model that you were going to take out old and replace it with new. Now there's a business impact to that, because you have to depreciate hardware and there's business considerations with it. But because of the scale of the cloud, you can do that far more easily as a provider. But I can't stress how important it is that it's the inverse. I mean, for example, in working with Microsoft, we're actually working with Intel to create, SAS is working directly with Intel to create what we call a reference architecture that's ideal for our platform, and Microsoft will provision that. I don't have to worry about that being downgraded. I just have to stay on top of consistently. It's a process called CI/CD, continuous innovation, continuous development, staying on top of the new innovations coming out of Intel so that we can tell our cloud provider what we need, and they'll go off, procure it, put it in place. I never have to worry about legacy systems or burn down on older systems. They're always looking for faster, more efficient processing.
Josh, can I throw in one quick thing on that? It's fascinating, right? In some ways, you look at, Tom's referred to them a few times, the three big cloud providers of, AWS, Microsoft, and Google. They all happen to be, three of the most valuable companies, and the richest companies, the deepest pockets in the world. Microsoft and Amazon are in the range of, $1.5 trillion market caps, and Google is just a shade under $1 trillion. So the littlest of those three is just under $1 trillion. So the money that they can plow relentlessly into R&D and this sort of hardware, software optimizations that Tom described, if these were, sort of small, somewhat shady companies, you don't really understand who they are, what they can do. These are three of the most formidable technology, innovation, and financial powerhouses in the world.
So to that end, this is a question from one of our students, is that which cloud service specifically, Bob, to you, do you use most? AWS, Azure, Google Cloud? And then the secondary question to that is, do you have a sense that AWS is going to become the dominant provider, similar to the way that Google is in a context of search? Tom, you're not off the hook here either. The follow-up question on this one also is, which one does SAS use most in terms of their partners? Which partner is the strongest for you? So Bob, we'll start off with you. And then for everybody else in the call, you should have your mic should be open. So if you've got a question, you can either type it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Bob, go ahead.
Sure. Sure. Thanks for that question. You know, I use Google Cloud for certain things. I use Microsoft Cloud for a couple of things here and there. I use sometimes Oracle Cloud when it's helping out with Zoom. So what we're doing right now, but that's largely, Zoom is largely an AWS customer. And I think this is going to be something we'll see more often here. There'll be big businesses heavily dependent on these big cloud infrastructure players, and maybe some of them will choose to say, I'll put all my eggs in this basket. But I think it's going to be equally common, Tom, I'm not sure how you feel about this, for some of these companies to say, I'll arbitrage my business across these three to ensure I continue to get really good deals from each of them.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing, Bob. SaaS is a strategic partner with Microsoft. So Azure is our, we'll call it preferred cloud provider. But like any software provider, we have to meet our customers where they are. I can't go to HSBC and say, oh, we only run on Google, on Azure, when they've made a decision to run on Google Cloud, or any other customer that goes to Amazon. You know, my opinion is Amazon is the dominant player. If I look at, for example, just the SaaS market and say, you know, as SaaS is a microcosm of the market, I would say probably Amazon, more of our customers run on Amazon today. But, you know, just like everything else, it's all about the statistics. What we're seeing, and the reason we selected Microsoft, is we see rapid adoption of Azure, because there are some behaviors that they see in Amazon that customers see. If you're a retailer, for example, you are not going to run your stuff on Amazon, because, you know, I hope no one from Amazon is on this call, but they have a tendency to eat their young, because they are in the retail business and they are going to do anything they can to dominate the retail business. So Walmart, you know, Target, all these other large retailers, they're not going to run on Amazon. So it's going to, it depends. And what we've had to do at SaaS is start to look at insurance companies, by and large, prefer Google. So we've got to get our platform to run on Google. What that means is that we'll release first on Microsoft, and we use CI/CD, continuous innovation, continuous development. We already support BigQuery. So anything we do on Microsoft, because Google supports Active Directory as its primary mechanism for security, we've already enabled to that, so check. Now we have to support BigQuery, which has a slightly different API and is a technology that's in transformation. Ultimately, it'll become not only an operational database, but also a data warehouse. So the idea is that you have to support BigQuery capabilities. So we have small teams that support very specific cloud services from an engineering perspective at SaaS, and we try to release every 2 weeks the first version coming out on Azure, and then a few weeks later it'll come out on Google, and then a few weeks later it'll come out on Amazon. But I think, Bob, you picked up on something that's really vitally important, and I don't want this audience to get confused. Many customers are going multi-cloud, and what that means is that you can run parts of your applications or parts of your solutions on different clouds. And the cloud providers have responded. Companies like Google have released products like Antos. And Antos is designed to work with your Amazon data and pull it into Google and transform it into something that Google can now use for compute purposes. And Microsoft has released Arc, which does the very same thing with an Azure flavor to it, because Azure has something called Synapse, which is a new technology that Microsoft has created, that ultimately, if I were an investor in Snowflake, I'd be very concerned about Microsoft, because Synapse really allows you to have a Snowflake capability, but distributed across a wide variety of different enterprises. So I think, to your point, Bob, we're going to see multi-cloud. It's here today, and it will continue to grow. That doesn't mean these companies are going to buy each other. It It means they have to do more to differentiate themselves, which means they need to put themselves in that customer's experience so that they provide a better experience than anybody else. Amazon had the advantage of the lead at first, and I think that they have competition, and they feel it on a day in and day out basis where they did not before.
Yep. Yep.
I don't know if I answered this question.
That was great.
Again, we're down to the last few minutes. We'll try to squeeze in one more question. And this actually relates to something you just mentioned, Tom. How does the rise of the IPO of Snowflake, how has the rise and IPO of Snowflake disrupted the three major cloud companies? And then we'll wrap up after that.
I was going to say, Snowflake, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong. I think they run on Amazon, they run on Google, and I think they have a version that runs on Microsoft Azure. So they're a great example of that multi-cloud capability. The reason that they have to do that is the very same reason that SaaS does. When a customer like Exxon signs up with a really large cloud provider, they expect your service to be there. Snowflake has had a phenomenal IPO. I mean, it has been incredible to watch. But they have, let me draw a distinction between Snowflake and Zoom, for example. None of the major players, maybe Google and Microsoft, have Teams and the G Suite products. They kind of compete with Zoom, but where Snowflake is in the bowels of the operational stuff that the cloud providers provide, which is data access, data delivery, all of those kinds of capabilities. So what I suspect Snowflake is going to see is a lot more competition from the cloud providers than, say, a Zoom would. Because it's an app that sits on top of the cloud. If you're going to play in that central part of the cloud, which is in the data storage, compute, networking, you had better expect those guys to compete with you, and they will.
Josh, I think the big impact from the Snowflake IPO, I think it's going to be one of those forces that leads to a rising tide that's going to lift all boats. I think it's one more of those things that business customers can now say, wow, all of these really cool, modern, sophisticated new capabilities are available in the cloud. I should have no hesitations as a business decision maker to move more aggressively toward the cloud.
Thank you. Thank you both for the time and for the conversation, and for everyone else for joining us. I'll remind you, these are going to be happening every week. Next week, Dr. Lewis Gordon is going to be joining us. And the week after that, we have one of our local startup companies, Tresata, is going to be presenting and talking about opportunities within that organization. And I think we may even have AWS showing up at some point down the road. So if you want to follow up on the cloud computing, that opportunity will be there as well. So keep a track. I shared in the chat the link to our recent news or recent events and upcoming events. You can kind of keep track of what's coming down the pike. Again, thank you both. Thank you all for joining us. Have a safe afternoon, and we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Stay safe.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great to speak with you.
All right. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Bye. All right. Sean, if you're on.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
I unmuted the mics, but nobody wanted to ask questions.
I think, it's always the challenge.
Yeah.
Folks get that interest right towards the end, and the questions, missed it. Well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. So again, next week, we've got an extended session that's going to be an hour and a half with Dr. Gordon. That's actually going to be tied more to one of our classes, but I think we've already got that set up. So,
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll see you next week. I think I'm on the schedule for that, but we've been running around so crazy here lately. It's not even funny. So our schedules have been shifting. So I can't say if it'll be me for sure.
Well, there's two agencies, there's two units on campus who probably deserve bonuses. Not that we ever give such things, even state system. You guys and the registrars, because over the last semester and a half, we have run you all ragged. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate it. So yeah, it's been interesting. Yeah. So been doing a lot of work with the chancellor lately, a lot of her stuff. So that I think it was yesterday I was in an all-day thing for her. So it's been interesting, but
I can imagine. Hey, when this is ready, if you can send me the link. I've got one faculty member who wants to, he was not able to participate, but he wanted to be able to catch up on it afterwards.
yeah. What I'll do is I'll come in tomorrow and do it, because it takes a couple of hours for this thing to process. But I'll go in tomorrow and download it, and
Perfect.
I'll put it on Google Drive,
Mm-hmm.
and I will send you a link to it. What I'll probably start doing is, I don't know if it's already set up that way or not, if Madeline did it,
Okay.
but we have folders that we keep on Google Drive.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
That way you can come in and get them.
Okay.
And, so if it's not there, I'll create one for you tomorrow and put it in there and share the folder with you, and then you
Great.
should get an email notification when anybody puts one of these things in. So,
Excellent.
so I'll go ahead and set that up for you tomorrow.
Thanks, Sean.
Oh, you're welcome.
Stay safe.